Black Fog. Aleksandr I. Kuprin. Translated from Russian by Douglas Ashby. Published 1905. A Petersburg Case. I remember perfectly his first arrival in Petersburg from his hot, lazy, sensual south. There emanated from him the very atmosphere of black earth force, the odor of dry, sun-baked feathergrass, the simple poetry of quiet sunsets, gradually fading away behind the cherry trees of little orchards. He had the inexhaustible health of the steppe, and he was so vivid in his fresh navet. He came straight from the station into the furnished rooms where I was living. It was winter, 8 o'clock in the morning, when, in the Petersburg streets, the lamps are still lit and the tired horses are dragging the sleeping night cabmen to their homes. He would take no refusal. He wouldn't listen to any of the maids' arguments, and said in his sonorous voice that rang through the corridor, "What are you talking about?" As if I didn't know him. "Why, he's more to me than my own brother." "What next?" "Show me into him." We had been at school together in the South, where, incidentally, he had not finished his course. I was fond of him, not more than of a real brother. He exaggerated this in his hurry, but, all the same, I was sincerely attached to him. However, though I immediately recognized his voice with its soft and yet guttural southern G and its provincial breadth of diapason, I cannot say that in the first minute I was particularly pleased. You know what it is when a man has been gallivanting all over the place through the night, goes to bed with his head not quite clear, and, on the top of it all, is faced with serious, timed work for the next day. In a word, I cursed under my blankets and firmly decided, if he came in, to pretend that I was asleep or dead, like a beetle that has been placed on the palm of a hand. Easier said than done. He burst in like a hurricane, threw himself at me, dragged me out of bed as if I were a child, shook me and pulled me about. It was impossible to be angry with him. The frost had given him a delightful emanation of apples and something else, healthy and vigorous. His moustache and beard were thawing, his face was burning brightly, his eyes were shining. "Well, well, how long are you going to wallow in those blankets? Get up," he roared, "get up or I'll smash you into little bits." Listen, you poor, benighted provincial, I was trying to make him feel ashamed. Here in Petersburg no one gets up before 11. Lie down on the sofa or ask for some tea, or send someone to fetch newspapers and read, but let me doze, if only for half an hour. No, nothing had any effect on him. He was bursting with stories of the past and plans for the future, so filled with new impressions that he seemed ready to blow up under their pressure if I hadn't acted as a sort of safety valve. First came the greetings. It appears that, up to the present, they all remember me, are quite fond of me, and read with pleasure my articles on economics. I was flattered and pretended not to have forgotten a single one of all those extraordinary names, all those Guzikovs, Lyadushenkos, Chernish, and so many other old acquaintances. Secondly, Petersburg had utterly stupefied him. Deuce take it, what an enormous town! What do you think? At the station there were nothing but swagger cabs, not a single ordinary one. Swagger cabs? I repeated doubtfully. On my honor, yes. I didn't grasp it at first, and I was in one of them before I saw that it was on tires. Well, I've let myself in, I thought. I wanted to crawl out of it, but I was ashamed to do that, and a policeman was hurrying them all. I was lucky to get out of it so cheaply, 1.5 rubles altogether. At the very most you ought to have paid 50 kopecks, I put in. There you're talking nonsense. What? Give a cab on tires 50 kopecks, for such a distance? Oh, and what streets you have here! And the people, oh, Lord! It's worse than the ferry boats at home. They're all over the place. And on one of the bridges there is a statue of 4 horses. Have you seen it? It's a sight. You live well here, I can see that. The whole time he kept saying "at home" and "you people here," drawing a line between the two as all provincials do. He was greatly struck by the fires lit at cross streets on account of the severe frost. "What's that for?" he asked with naive curiosity. I answered quite seriously. It's an idea of the town council to heat the streets so as to spend less on fuel in government offices. His eyes grew round, and so did his mouth, from astonishment, and all he could pronounce was, "Oh." The next minute he saw it and burst out laughing, laughed in long, deafening, youthful peals. I had to remind him that all the other lodgers were still asleep, that the partitions were made of papier-mâché, and that I didn't want to get into trouble with my landlady. Eerie came in with the samovar. She looked sideways at Boris with an expression of distrust and agitation, as though a horse had been received into the room. She was a regular Petersburg maid, sensitive and not without understanding. At 5 o'clock we dined at the Nevsky in an enormous and bad restaurant. The room, with its colors, the Romanians, the plush furniture, the electric lights, the mirrors, the monumental head waiter, and particularly the spectacle of the heavy, impudent, frock-coated waiters, with their enormous moustaches, all this overwhelmed my country friend. During the whole meal, he sat bewildered, awkward, winding his feet round the front legs of his chair, and it was only when we were having coffee that he said with a sigh, shaking his head slowly, "Why, yes, a restaurant. They wouldn't have believed it at home. It's a regular temple of Baal with his priests. You'd better take me to a place where it's simpler. Here I see only the aristocracy. Probably they're all princes and counts." But in the evening, in my rooms, he brightened up again. I asked him for the first time seriously what he intended to do with himself. Up to this, we had only touched on this question in a hurried, rather diffuse way. He puffed himself out like a young bantam and answered proudly, "I have come to conquer Petersburg." These very words are often uttered by the young heroes of French novelists, who, just arrived in Paris, are looking out at it from the heights of some garret. I smiled skeptically. He noticed it and began with special warmth, the comic side of which was heightened by his southern accent, to convince me of the fact that he represented the gifted, large, provincial South which was going to be victorious over the anemic, untemperamental, dry, capital-like North. It was the inevitable law of struggle between two temperaments, and its result is always easily guessed. Oh, one can cite any number of names: ministers, writers, painters, barristers. Beware, withered, cold, pale, dull Petersburg. The South is coming. I wished to believe him, or rather I didn't wish to disillusion him. We dreamt a little together. Lai produced from his basket trunk a bottle of good old homemade plum liqueur which we began to drink in friendly fashion. What? What? Do they make in Petersburg here such old plum liqueur? He kept asking proudly, and then scornfully, "There you are. And you still discuss?" Little by little, he settled down. I established him in furnished rooms next my own, for the time being on credit, in anticipation of the trophies to be won in victories over the withered North. It is extraordinary how at once he won the general goodwill of the establishment, pushing into the background the former favorite, a poet with red curly hair who looked like a deacon in a picture. The landlady, everyone knows the Petersburg landlady of furnished rooms, a lady of full figure, 45 years old, with corkscrew curls on her forehead, always in black and very tightly laced. The landlady used often to invite him to her apartments in the morning, to have coffee, a high honor to which many, even of the old lodgers, never dared to aspire. In return for this amiability, he would give her the contents of the morning papers, as well as business advice in her innumerable pettifogging transactions. Everyone wants to get the better of a poor widow. Deuce take it! Like a true southern Russian, for all his apparent simplicity, he was a very adroit and practical fellow, with a quick comprehension and a certain benevolent shrewdness. Even Eerie got used to him and regarded him, I believe, with a sort of, well, I don't want to gossip. All I will say is that in those days he was very good-looking, tall, strong, with dark, melancholy eyes and young laughing red lips under his Ukrainian moustache. He was nearer the truth than I was, the old Petersburg skeptic. The luck was with him, probably because a bold, self-confident man can control destiny, though destiny whirls and scatters in different directions perplexed and weak people. Perhaps, too, he was assisted by those original traits of character which he brought with him from the heart of his provincial South: shrewdness, observation, a tranquil and open manner of speech, an innate tendency to humor, strong nerves that refused to be troubled by the chaos of life in the capital. It may have been this or that, but in any case the South, as represented by him, obviously and successfully conquered the North. My friend, quickly, in 3 or 4 days, found work for himself in connection with one of the largest railways and, a month later, had attracted the attention of the authorities. He was entrusted with the revision of some plans of railway traffic, or something of the sort. The whole thing might have been easily finished in a week or 2, but, for some reason or other, Boris got particularly interested in it in his stubbornly insistent way. He took it into his head to frequent the public library, dragged home enormous reference books, stuffed with figures, and devoted his evenings to mysterious mathematical calculations. The result of all this was that he presented the authorities with a scheme of passenger and goods trains that combined simplicity and obviousness with many other practical signs of efficiency. He was praised, and attracted special attention. 6 months later, he was already in receipt of 150 rubles a month and was employed on independent work. But apart from this, he gave frequent music lessons, he was an excellent musician, wrote articles for the newspapers and technical articles on railway questions, and sang on Saturdays and Sundays in a well-known church choir as well as sometimes in opera and light opera choruses. He was capable of an amazing amount of work, but without strain, without any effort, it came to him somehow naturally, easily, as though he were wading through it, as though it were all a joke, with that externally lazy manner of his. And always, with his shrewd little smile, he would be observing something, keeping his eye on something, as though, after all, he were only playing with the present, merely testing his untouched force while, at the same time, vigilantly and patiently waiting for his real opening. For some mysterious, remote object, known only to himself, he was studying, through the self-teaching methods of Toussaint and Langostet, French, German, and English. I could hear him sometimes at the other side of the partition repeating, with his terrifying pronunciation, "Elabile Bourdon, la mouche vole." When I asked him why all this was necessary, he would answer with his sly benevolence, "Oh, it's like this, I've nothing to do." All the same, he knew how to enjoy himself. Somewhere on Vassiliev Island, he had unearthed some of his fellow countrymen, Ukrainians from Poltava, who wore embroidered shirts, with little ribbons instead of ties, and enormously wide trousers tucked into their top boots. They used to smoke long pipes, would ostentatiously spit through the corners of their lips onto the floor, and had nothing but contempt for all our town cultivation. I went once or twice to their little evenings. They drank gorilka, not our vodka, but a special brand brought from down there, 8 slices of pork and enormous sausages so long that one had to coil them on one's plate in 10 or 15 circles. There was singing, too, wonderful singing, extraordinarily sad and stately. I can still remember, as if it were yesterday, Boris passing his hand nervously over his long, beautiful, wavy hair as he started the couplet of an old Cossack song. His voice was warm, tender, slightly vibrating, and every time that I listened to him I experienced a tickling and throbbing in my chest and I felt like crying without any reason. And afterwards one drank gorilka again, and, at the end, one danced the gopak, one of the national Ukrainian dances. Boris' jacket would fly away from his immense shoulders to a corner of the room and he himself would soar from end to end, rapping out the time with his heels, whistling in tune and slyly raising and lowering his dark eyebrows. He became the head of this dear Ukrainian farm village, tucked away among the severe parallel streets of Petersburg. There was something about him attractive, charming, irresistible. And everything seemed to come to him as a joke, as if it were merely by the way. I believed now definitely in his victory over the North, but something inexplicable, something perturbing, would never leave my soul when I thought of him. It began in the spring. Soon after Easter, which was late that year, we drove together to the islands. It was a clear, pensive, gentle evening. The quiet waters of the rivers and canals dozed peacefully beside their banks, reflecting the pink and mauve colors of the deadened sky. The young, grayish foliage of the black, century-old lime trees on the banks looked at itself in the water so naively, so joyfully. For a long time we were silent. At last, under the charm of this exquisite evening, I said slowly,